Good morning, everyone.
To order. Welcome to meeting number 5 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs. Pursuant to the motion adopted on September 18, 2025, the committee is meeting to resume its study on suicide prevention among veterans. And before we welcome our witnesses, for people who are viewing, I would like to provide a trigger warning. We will be discussing experiences related to suicide and grief. This may be triggering to viewers with similar experiences. If you feel distressed or need help, please advise our clerk. For all witnesses and for members of Parliament, it is important to recognize that these are difficult discussions, and also for our witness, if you do not feel comfortable at one point, please let us know. We can pause our committee for you. So I just want to make sure that everybody is aware. Thank you very much. Avant de continuer aussi, j'aimerais...
Before we begin, I would like to ask all in-person participants to read the guidelines written on the updated cards on the table. These measures are in place to help to prevent audio and feedback incidents, acoustic shocks, and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. And you will also notice that there's a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video.
I'd like to welcome our first panel this morning.
We have Ms. Noémie Veilleux with us, who is a sexologue and a public policy consultant.
Thank you very much for your service to Canada. Thank you for everything you do, Mrs. Root. Écoutez, nous allons commencer en donnant chaque...
And we're going to give 5 minutes to each witness for your opening statements, and then we will have a series of questions and answers together with the committee members. So I would like to give the floor to Madame Veilleux for 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour, merci.
Good morning, and thank you for welcoming me here today. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Noémie, and I'm a sexologist specialised in sexual violence, and I'm here today not as a veteran, but rather as an ally, and I have co-written a report called Veterans First in partnership with 2 clinics, Pembroke Psychological Services and Visions Counselling, and for that report we looked at what's happening with their public policies in terms of mental health for veterans in Canada. So we had conversations with veterans from here and elsewhere, and we were able to deal with some very important elements that, in fact, are failings within our system. So I'm here for 3 reasons today. First of all, to discuss with you the fact that sexual violence is not just an abstract concept in forces or for veterans. No, it's their reality and it causes them suffering. And secondly, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the culture of silence within the armed forces and also in the security forces and the transition to civilian life. And thirdly, the quality of care. So first of all, what does this sexual violence look like when we're in service? It's not always spectacular. It's part of daily gestures or degrading remarks or jokes about people's bodies or some silent blackmail with comments or isolation when we say no. And sometimes there's repeated physical assaults from superiors or from colleagues. And this is violence that's destructive because it takes place in an environment which is based on loyalty, trust and obedience, and absolute trust, in fact. And this trust, when it's betrayed, it's not just a psychological injury, but also it injures our identity. So it's difficult to understand that with sexual violence, it slips into our normal life. It's covered up by humour and camaraderie. It's difficult to speak out about this in an environment where we don't want to be a bother, even more so as a woman. And unfortunately, this type of sexual violence is actually something that's suffered by 1 woman out of 3, and it's important that to remember that men in the armed forces can also be victims of sexual violence. So why do we not talk more about this? Well, women decide to stay silent to survive, to keep their jobs, so they're not declared unstable or incapable of serving, and they're decreed as inadequate, or that they don't have then the capacity to protect the nation and be integrated within their force. And so they decide to keep silence. It's a survival strategy, and then that becomes a risk factor which perpetuates this violence continually. And this silence amplifies shame. You're cut off from your system, and the suffering turns into a complete isolation. So when there's injury and silence, then it's possible to develop institutional trauma where you've been injured not just by an individual, but also by a structure that's meant to protect us, but is not doing so. So what is the link between sexual trauma and suicide, you might ask? The data is clear. Women are 3 to 4 times more likely to develop symptoms of severe depression and anxiety disorder and suicidal ideation as a result of sexual violence within armed forces. The sexual trauma creates a rupture between your body and the sentiment of security and physical dignity. And within the forces, there's also moral and institutional injuries or sanctuary trauma, which is very strong. Sexual assaults during your military service means that you're having to completely control yourself. I'm trying to put you into the skin of someone who's experiencing this. So every day you have to try and manage your emotions so that you don't appear as being vulnerable or weak, and you avoid making any gestures that could attract attention or say something that could put you in danger. You go to work every day and you go into the same environment where the sexual assault took place day after day and not be able to say anything. You come across the person who's assaulted, you have to obey orders, and you're always hyper vigilant. And after military service, this protection strategy becomes a source of isolation. When you're a veteran, you don't have any mission framework or team framework, and you're left to yourself. So it's a trauma that travels together with veterans. It affects their sleep, their sexual health, their relationship with those who are close to them, and their capacity to ask for help. And there's some difficulty in tolerating physical contact, sometimes on feeling safe even at home or maintain a job. So there are definitely very significant consequences, and some of the veterans will develop PTSD, chronic pain, anxiety and depression disorders, a lack of meaning, shame, and even suicidal thoughts. That's why we're here today to talk about this. And how will quality of care play a role here? First of all, if we recognise that sexual trauma is a determinant for mental health, then we will already have made progress. I'd also like to say that if we look at the mental health programs here in Canada that are offered to veterans, we realise that there's not necessarily any professional training that's high quality to deal with trauma. We know that Veterans Canada, as an institution, will say that the professionals are all trained and that there's a certain level of service, but the reality on the ground is that this is not necessarily the case. By trying to change the system a few years ago, we dropped the quality of care and pushed aside professionals who were already offering services sensitive to trauma that were adapted to the military culture. We also have to think about interprofessional collaboration. That's another aspect that came out in this report. Given the current system and the current infrastructure that's in place to actually enable collaboration between professionals that will support the female veterans and male veterans. And then in terms of quality of care, we should not overlook the role of access to personal care for those who've gone through sexual violence and are living with traumas every day, whether they're of a sexual nature or not. We need to be close to the first line people. We need to create this connection that's necessary in order to heal. So by way of conclusion, I'd just like to say that It's asking them to do a great deal to ask veterans to show courage, and we need to build up a system that actually honours their resilience without imposing this question of suffering in silence. Thank you.
Madame Veilleux.
Thank you very much, Madame Veilleux.
Pass the floor to Mrs. Root for 5 minutes. And again, thank you very much, Mrs. Root, for being here this morning.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Jessica Ruth. I'm the widow of Constable Lee Ruth with the RCMP. Lee and I knew each other since we were children, and we were partners in life before he entered the RCMP at 23 years old. Lee's first posting was in 2006, and he medically retired in 2022. During his career, Lee experienced people and incidents that would never leave the back of his mind, no matter how hard he tried. In 2014-2015, Lee started seeing a psychologist, followed by a psychiatrist. He was diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety, depression, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Throughout his years of policing, there was a gradual change in my husband. He became hypervigilant, irritable, angry, sad, and disconnected from his family. He pushed others away when he obviously wanted and needed connection. Lee was determined to get better. He received services from his doctor, 3 different psychologists at different points in time, a psychiatrist, and various Veteran Affairs case managers and clinical care managers. From 2014 to 2025, Lee was prescribed approximately 37 different types of medications to address his mental health concerns, with many of these having several dosage changes. Lee attended a 7-week residential treatment facility for trauma and attended ketamine treatment. After many years of fighting for his mental health with no positive results, he decided he could no longer fight. On June the 4th of this year, my husband died by suicide, leaving behind myself, our children, his parents, his brother, and countless others who loved him. Today, I will speak about 2 important issues: prevention, intervention, and access to resources. I think it's important to discuss prevention of operational stress injury. Often police officers, my husband included, work shifts alone. There were many times when backup was located an hour away, placing their lives in unnecessary danger and contributing to poor mental health. When members are off work due to health reasons, this often leaves the unit or the shift short in staff. This creates a workplace environment of animosity, and members are made to feel guilty for taking time to leave or attend to any family-related needs. As far as I know, RCMP members do not need to attend regular counseling. A debriefing to a traumatic event is great, but from my observations, many do not know how the event has impacted them until later when they are experiencing struggles. Before we relocated to Iqaluit, both Lee and I were required to complete psychological assessments. There was no psychological testing required when we transferred out of the North. I believe that if a thorough psychological screening had been completed by an experienced psychologist, there would have been signs that his mental health was at risk. So just a note on access to resources. If a veteran is fortunate enough to have a case manager, most are not provided with a case manager's direct line, but are expected to send an email or navigate phone menus. When someone has significant mental health concerns and legitimate questions about a service, not being able to make a simple phone call to their case manager can have negative impacts. Lee was eventually provided with a direct line to his last case manager. After Lee medically discharged from the RCMP, we relocated back to Western Newfoundland to be closer to family. This transition was not easy for him, and he began to decline even more in his mental health. Lee was very aware of his decline and was active in seeking treatment and resources, but the onus was on him to find these resources. On one occasion, Lee provided consent for me to speak with his case manager, and it was at this time that I learned the case manager's awareness of resources, groups, and organizations was based on the information they had received from other veterans or conversations they had with coworkers. There was no list, no database of resources for different areas and locations. If there was a cost associated to access this resource, it was my husband's responsibility to have his family doctor or psychologist write a letter stating how this resource would benefit his mental health. Often my spouse would talk about sanctuary trauma, a type of psychological trauma that occurs when a person who has already experienced a stressful event is further harmed by the place or institution they expected to be supportive. After years of serving his country as a trusted member of the RCMP to uphold the law, He felt that his needs were often questioned and felt like he had to prove them to be true. The amount of complex paperwork and justification to get benefits approved that he was entitled to was very discouraging and can impede a veteran from obtaining services. Through CAF and RCMP members, Lee learned of VAC's clinical care managers, who assist clients with complex health needs in forming case plans to build supports and to access programs and services. At first, VAC denied him this service, stating that he did not meet the need. Lee would say that though he was considered 100% disabled, he was not ill enough to receive this service. After much advocating from his psychologist, Lee was reassessed and approved for a clinical care manager. He was reminded on a frequent basis that the services of a clinical care manager are only temporary, and an inability to complete tasks would cease the service or could cease the service. Many of the things he could not follow through with due to his mental health, and this made him feel more hopeless and caused him to fear that his services would be revoked. When Lee's clinical care manager planned to be on extended leave during this past summer, he requested the services of another clinical care manager until her return. He was told that now he was too ill for another clinical care manager and that he should consider a local home care worker. I cannot express enough the harmful impact that this had on Lee. He felt like people were giving up on his healing and his recovery. At a time when he was at most ill, VAC wanted to switch him from an educated professional with a master's degree who specialized in mental health to a generalized home care worker. Though Lee had a psychiatrist, psychologist, VAC case manager, and clinical care manager, they mostly worked in silos until he became very sick. Then they began to have some care team meetings. On 2 different occasions, he attended the local hospital. On the first visit, we waited 8 hours to speak to a psychiatrist who told us that there were no beds available. And because he had a psychiatrist already, there was not much more they could do for him there. The second time we visited, my husband spoke privately to an attending physician and was voluntarily admitted to the psychiatric unit. At 3 a.m., he checked himself out. He explained that they would not provide him with his prescribed sleeping medication and offered no alternative. Lee approached his psychiatrist and suggested admission to another hospital in the province. His psychiatrist advised that there was nothing that they could do to the hospital that she was not already doing for him as an outpatient. It was at this point that he had vowed to never again attend the hospital looking for mental health support, because what would be the point? At times when I feared for my husband's safety and suggested that we attend the hospital or call an ambulance, he told me that he would not be going and would threaten to kill himself before they would have time to arrive. I expressed this concern to members of his team. The ongoing response I received was that they were not an emergency service and that if I feared for his safety, I had to call the emergency service. This was an unbearable cycle of pain and uncertainty that we lived in as a family. Lee still searched for further service providers and services that might help him and consulted with different members of his care team. One time he was advised that he would be overserviced. Once again, he was discouraged. He might have been overserviced in VAC's opinion. However, in my position as a widow from a husband who took his own life, he was not receiving the appropriate services or care. The impact PTSD has had on our family unit is significant, and it was suggested that I receive counseling covered by VAC as well. The only way that this could be approved was if my husband's psychologist state a case for how treating my mental health would help his mental health. Once again, the onus was on Lee to communicate and arrange treatment, adding more for us to navigate. Families should be given mental health benefits in their own right, not dependent on the veteran. This gives the family skills to deal with complex PTSD, increasing their ability to support their veteran. And in cases like ours, where the worst outcome became reality, it is vital that mental health treatment be in our own right and that we are able to maintain our existing therapeutic relationships. I had to engage with the Office of the Veterans Ombudsman to continue care with my existing therapist after Lee died. We were given 6 months. Having to fight for continued benefits is already weighing on me. Since I lost the love of my life and my children lost their dad, we are getting through each day one moment at a time. I assure you that this is going to be a lifelong journey of healing and recovery from the trauma that I've experienced. I will live the rest of my life wondering, what could I have done differently that would have saved my husband?
Our children are young and have so much to process, not with only the death of their father, but of years of living with a parent who has PTSD. This process will not be a short one. Children need years. They need time to build relationships with counselors, to open up to their feelings and thoughts. Kids are not able to connect their feelings with their grief. And this is a vital time to help them learn and practice positive coping skills to safeguard their own mental health. After sharing our experience of losing our mental health benefits with a group of RCMP spouses across the country, one started a petition and connected me with a CAF spouse whose husband died while deployed. The goal of petition E6654 is for families and survivors to obtain mental health benefits in their own right for conditions related to service. Together, they have created a Facebook group dedicated to advocating for families and survivors to obtain mental health treatment benefits in their own right. When the petition closed, it had 5,420 signatures from across Canada. For anyone who knew my husband, Lee, you know that he would have been the first person to stand up and fight for what was right. He had ability to connect with so many people on a personal level. He liked the realness in people and wanted to pump their tires. This was a term he used for making people feel good about themselves. Before Lee became unwell, he was a happy person who loved life and his family and friends. Lee loved our children more than life itself. I believe that he made the ultimate sacrifice. In fear of what impact of prolonged exposure of his complex PTSD would have had on our children and myself. Lee had more courage and resilience than anyone I have ever known. And now that he's no longer able to fight, I feel it's my journey now to help advocate for better mental health services for the veteran community. In the memory of my husband, I am hoping that Lee's legacy will be improved mental health services for RCMP and CAF members, and that families and survivors obtain mental health treatment benefits in their own right for conditions related to service. Thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ruth, for sharing Lee this morning with us and sharing a little bit of your life with us. I want to say on behalf of our committee my sincere condolence to you, to your family, and your friends. We will now start with Mrs. Ansey for 6 minutes round of questions.
Good morning, Jessica. And I just want to reiterate and thank you for your courage in being here. And again, to say sorry for your loss from all of us sitting here today. Jessica, you reached out to our office, and one of the things that struck me from our communication was this feeling that you had about feeling disrespected and abandoned in this process. And veterans often feel that way in this journey. And I just think it's important that maybe you just expand on that a little bit for the benefit of the work that this committee is doing right now around these supports, if you can.
Sure. So days after my husband passed away, I was in contact with Veteran Affairs to say, okay, what next? Like, this is what's happened. Where do we go from here? And my biggest concern was counseling, continued counseling for myself and my children. I was at that point, I was advised that we no longer were eligible for this benefit to be covered under VAC, because we only receive counseling if it benefits the veteran, and that we do not receive counseling in our own right. I could not believe what I was hearing, because at this time of immense grief, when I can hardly put a sentence together, I was now thinking, okay, so what do I need to do now to continue this counseling with our counselor? I was advised, of that there was the VAC assistance line, but that is very different than long-term ongoing mental health counselor with someone you've already formed a relationship with. I had to start thinking about, okay, so now I have to apply for either my children to be under my work benefits, or we have to apply under, if we can reapply under Lee's benefits. And though that does not seem a lot to some people, when you're in immense grief and you have to think about these things, along with everything else that needs to be done, it's a mountain. It's tremendous. And I just felt like after everything he had done for his country, that we as a family, you know, they say the member serves, the family serves. I don't feel like they thought we were serving.
Thank you. And just to pick up on that point, I mean, we're both moms. Our kids play hockey together. Can you also just describe a little bit more what it's like for your children in his experience as his mental health was deteriorating, and also now? I know it's difficult, but I just think it's important that we understand that component as well.
So as his mental health deteriorated, my children, us as a family life, it was affected. The kids could see, they would ask questions, you know, why is Dad angry? Why is Dad crying? Why can't Dad do these things with us? So it was very difficult to explain that to our children. We tried our best, but they are in a household where PTSD is living. So we requested that my oldest child receive counseling as well, and that it was covered by VAC because it was in my husband's best interest for our children. Our youngest one was not receiving it at the time, just to try to help him cope with, I guess, the environment and his dad's mental health and what that looks like in the family home.
Thank you, and I want to give you an opportunity because, you know, when we walk with people through grief, oftentimes when they see something positive come from something that's extremely painful, I think that helps in the grieving process. And so I just want to ask you, what would you like to see happen differently from all of this that can make a difference in the lives of other people that are potentially in the same situation as you?
Well, there are a few things. One, obviously, I've discussed its mental health benefits in our own right as families and survivors. That is not dependent on the veteran. Some veterans do not either want to engage in treatment, are sick and do not feel that they can, or there's divorce. And in my case, there's death. It cannot be dependent on the veteran. Also, I'd like to see more involvement for VAC case managers. So right now, with regards to veterans who have severe illness, mental illness, physical illness, having to be the person to find the resources in their areas, having it be dependent on them getting notes from their doctors, filling out paperwork, trying to find out what they're eligible for. These are things that I think a case manager should be more involved in. They should be able to have easier access to their case managers. All these resources should be upfront. Shouldn't be having to log into their data, to their secured info to send an email so that someone will call them back, or to use a voice menu. These things are not helpful when someone is having, when someone has a severe mental illness.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ruth. I would like now to pass the floor to Mr. Clark for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to start, Mrs. Ruth, thank you for being here this morning with all of us. Thank you for sharing your own story and Lee's story. Just want to express my sincere condolences for your loss as well. So thank you very, very much. Madame Veilleux, je m'excuse, mais je vais demander mes questions en anglais.
Sorry, but I'm going to put my questions in English to be clear.
In your opening statement, you touched on the culture of silence in your words, and we've heard about that in previous meetings on this study. It's been phrased stoic culture from other witnesses, but the same general concept of which is a problem, as you correctly point out. So my question is, obviously, as you said, there can be a culture of silence within the active service as well. In your experience, does that persist as well once a active duty member moves into status as a veteran? And if so, how does it persist? And how can we kind of crack that shell a bit and break through that problem that you rightly pointed out?
Thank you so much for your question. I'm going to go to English and try to do good. No, it's okay. It's okay. I think it's good that we alternate a little bit between languages. I think your question about culture of silence just puts on the table something very important, which is it's not only in the forces that there is a culture of silence. There is this culture, well, it's present everywhere in and out of the forces. So I see it as layers, you know. When you're in the forces, you have a certain layer of this culture, and then when you transition to civilian life, you also get all the other layers that you see in the general population as well. So why it persists, it's because your body in certain ways gets so used to these like protection mechanism, if I can call it that when you step out of work, you have so many things that change in your life that this becomes your anchor, your new normal. So you will, in certain ways, just try to hold on what you know in your nervous system, and that is staying silent and coping with your emotions, and it's mostly in unhealthy ways. And so how do you crack this? I would say, well, first, I think your testimonials was very moving, and it just speaks to how important prevention is. We need to understand that even if it is difficult putting numbers to prevention policies, we have to go forward with strong, robust, and holistic policies that do include, yes, sexual trauma, but as well like sanctuary trauma, and understand that this silence that we carry just becomes part of who we are, and it's such a big weight on our identity. And from working with sexual violence victims, you get to understand that losing the sense of self becomes the new normal. And this is what we want to avoid at all costs with policy. You know, we're supposed to be world leaders in terms of veterans' mental health. In theory, our policies are one of the strongest in the world, and where we get carried away is in the deployment of those policies. And so from a policy standpoint, we can definitely do better. And it's not about starting over. It's not about building from scratch. It's about building properly on what's there and understanding that our metrics, the metrics we use to do policy evaluation, well, they're not necessarily appropriate. And I remember hearing ADM Aris talking about the fact that there's two times less wait times since the new policy was deployed. But then if the normal waiting time is 3 years, then you bring it down to what, 1.5 years to get service, to get proper mental health support, if it's proper. Because that's the other problem in certain ways. What type of service, what type of quality do we offer our veterans? And I think there are ways, even if we cannot magically resolve this problem, to go forward. If we look at the UK, for example, there is this amazing peer support system that can really make a difference. And it is proven that veterans can benefit from having good infrastructures for peer support and mentoring and help, like proper support to transition to civilian life. And when we talk about sexual violence victim, this also offers a space for healing. And I think we need to stop to medicalize trauma. We need to understand that we're working with humans who went through difficult, very difficult, experiences. And when looking at policy, we're starting to lean more for like a people first policy and not a process first. And I think what Ms. Root just talked about just shows so adequately how we put the processes first in our policies. And it's not normal to be on the verge of a mental breakdown and go through a phone menu to get support. And so how can we do better as a country to both help, yes, veterans, but sexual violence victim in the forces is what belongs to, yes, us as a community, but you being here today and working on this issue. And I would like to conclude on, a question. How many stories of suicide do we all need to hear to move on this piece? We shouldn't have to listen to one more story. We should understand that this is real and the sources of these suicides, yes, they come from different, they anchor in different life situations and experiences. But, and if I may conclude, sexual violence is part of them.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Veilleux. Je suis vraiment désolée.
Thank you very much, Madame Veilleux. Sorry, unfortunately, I'm the timekeeper here, but I'll turn to Madame Gaudreau for 6 minutes to perhaps continue on certain of these points. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we were just talking about this when we were listening to Veteran Affairs. When it comes to prevention, the Deputy Minister was saying it's difficult to detect. What are the causes? It's intangible. We're talking about difficult forms of suffering that are hard to correlate with a specific gesture. And I would also like to extend my sincere condolences to you, Madam. So can we allow ourselves to have a literature scan with your research, please, to show the true causes? It may be following a sexual assault, for example, or another form of trauma, and show that there's a direct link with suicide. We're being told that it's difficult to detect this link. When we talk about mental health, that's the easy excuse to shrug off responsibilities and say there's no cause and effect link that's clear enough to take act, or they say we don't have enough evidence. But I have the impression that you've heard stories that constitute evidence in and of themselves. I'm here to say that sexual violence is something insidious. It causes a great deal of suffering. And if we really wanted to align all that data, we could do it. It exists, this type of sexual violence. And the first stage on your side is to collectively recognize the difficulties. These definitely exist, but the difficulties that come in life after that. There's sexual violence, there's trauma that takes place, and we have that with us for the rest of our life. We can never decree that's it, I'm completely healed. Public policies would like to put a stamp on this person, say this person is now healed, they're fine now. They're not going to fall back into difficulties with their mental health. But how can we support people and recognize that sexual violence is part of the causes that lead to mental health issues experienced by veterans? It's a societal choice. It doesn't cost very much. Perhaps we want to hold back and we don't know exactly how to tackle this because we don't have enough data developed to have enough evidence. But I think you should move ahead and recognize the presence of sexual violence in armed forces. That would be a gift so that we'd be capable as a country to have preventive measures for suicide that are robust and that would make us proud on the international scene. Let's be leaders in terms of public policy and our mental health for veterans. I think there's certainly plenty of work still to be done before we're described in that fashion. I have another question. People who are working in this area are working in good faith, and I wonder whether perhaps they have compassion fatigue, or perhaps these are workers who do not have the right expertise. I'm trying to get to the bottom of this. Well, to answer that question, I would say nobody gets up in the morning and goes to work and says, today I'm going to do a bad job. Nobody thinks like that. The responsibility as to whom we hire as a mental health professional for veterans for the moment is based on a program that doesn't always put the veteran first. So yes, these professionals are trained, but when we look at their working conditions, we quickly realize that what's offered is it's for people who are just starting out. It's for people who are still speaking general terms about mental health. And we realize that the people who were really well trained to do this have not been offered working conditions that were similar to what they had beforehand, before this new public policy. So they weren't able to join this new movement under this new public policy. And so there's resentment, there's clinicians that are well trained and who could also mentor new clinicians, but are not doing this because the system has pushed them aside, and the new public policy hasn't, in fact, taken into account their desire to be included. And that really is a pity. But there is a possibility to turn back the clock and get these people on board again so that we can have true significant change achieved. Now, I don't have much time left. Now, we're talking about 1 woman in 3 you've mentioned who are victims. But when it comes to sexual violence within the LGBTQ2+ community, what's happening there? I'm trying to find data. Is there even a bigger culture of silence, or does it not exist? 20 seconds, Madame Veilleux. It's even more prevalent there. When we look at the data within the population in general, it's more prevalent, and also in this subgroup, the prevalence is hitting the ceiling, and it's even more difficult to speak out about this when it's part of your overall coming out. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madame Veilleux, as well.
Thank you, both of you, for being here, and I'll particularly thank you, Jessica, for your courage, because I know that wouldn't have been easy to share your personal and your family story. So thank you for that courage. It's important because it's the only way that we make change, and I know you know that, and that's why you're doing what you're doing. I'm going to start with you because there were a number of things you mentioned. I guess I'll actually let me back up. You know, you've made it very clear that there's a need for the families to be able to have mental health counseling in their own right. I want to say I agree with you. It was actually something that was part of our Conservative platform in the last election, and I certainly hope it'll be a recommendation in this report. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the veteran themselves, if we can. You've obviously had lots of experience there too, and you mentioned a number of different things. You know, you talked about the various professionals that Lee was working with, that they were all working in silos. You mentioned how, you know, the resources that seemed to be available, it was either he was finding out about them himself, or even the Veterans Affairs caseworkers that he was working with seemed to have, the only reason they had information about resources was stuff they'd gathered from other veterans. So it seems to me like there's probably a good suggestion right there that there needs to be, you know, Veterans Affairs needs to be work better with partners and make sure that there's more access for more options for services and counseling and various other things for our veterans. But beyond that, well, I want your thoughts on that, first of all, and then beyond that, is there other things that Veterans Affairs could do differently that would have, you know, helped your husband or others in a better way?
When it comes to case managers and VAC offering services, we as a family were very grateful for the support that Veteran Affairs provided. However, there are flaws, and one of them is that, though people are eligible for these services due to their mental health conditions, their service, it is on the onus of the veteran to find out what these resources are and to request them. So, for instance, the first time I found out about it, I had spoke to one of the case managers, and it was then, and I was so surprised when I said, can you give me a list? Give me a list of all the available resources that he is eligible for. And I'm not talking financial, I'm talking support. And it was then that I was told, well, there is no list, there is no database.
So if I can, interrupt there, that was shocking to me. When I first heard that, I've heard it a number of times from a number of different veterans and family members. How surprised were you by that? And I mean, is that clearly something that needs to change?
Yes, I was extremely surprised. I said, well, then how does he know about this? She's like, well, the resources that we know about is if I have a veteran on my caseload who's already used a service, or if another caseworker, a case manager, discussed something that one of their veterans had utilized. My concern is how many veterans with severe mental health illness and families, not everyone has the ability to locate, to find these resources and know how to get them.
That's a great point right there. I mean, the onus should not be on the veteran or their family members, or, I hear so often that, veterans that finally do get help, it's like because they just happen across another veteran who gave them a recommendation. It just seems crazy to me that there isn't, that access to resources and that list that needs to be there, the repository of service providers at Veterans Affairs. So thank you for raising that, because I think that's an important recommendation we need. I don't have much time, but I guess I wanted to ask you both a little bit you both mentioned sanctuary trauma. Can you speak, I guess each of you, if you can briefly, to, that sanctuary trauma that you experienced, or that veterans experience when they're dealing with VAC? What's at the heart of that? What can we do about it?
Madame Roots and Madame Veilleux, you have 10 seconds for both of you, so I'm thinking maybe this is something to come back to Mr. Richards for next rounds of questions. I apologize sincerely. For 5 minutes, Mrs. Erdl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mrs. Ruth, for sharing your story with us today, and my condolences. My questions are for Madame Veilleux, and my French isn't great either, so I'm going to ask you in English. We've heard from Mrs. Ruth about difficulties for families to access services. I've also heard from a number of Legion members in my riding that there are gaps identified for the in continuity of care for military families. So in your experience and in consideration of things like sanctuary and institutional trauma, how do organizations like the Legion best serve veterans or their families when they're facing a crisis?
I think, first of all, they're kind of responsible for creating a space where it is okay to talk about mental health issues. And right now, there is so much stigma around this that even just naming it is so difficult for veterans. And when they do, they're laughed at. They're not taken seriously. They're being told to be strong and step up and go through it, and that it's going to be okay. And so if we can only create a space where it's okay to say that we're not doing good and we need support, and that it's not seen as something bad or something that makes us less of a good person or less capable, then we take a huge step towards healing and preventing suicide. And when I touched a bit earlier on peer support, this is what I mean. Like, the story you just told about not having a list of resources is not surprising at all to me. And these veterans, they understand each other. They went through similar, experiences. And what if we create those spaces so they can share and be supported at least a little bit while they wait for proper services?
Thank you. Switching gears a little bit, our new government has implemented a new cabinet post devoted to artificial intelligence, and I noted in your report that you referenced AI in relation to mental health supports. So could you expand on where you believe AI can be applied to mental health services for veterans, please?
Yeah, I think we need to remain careful about the place of AI, but also not be blind about the space that it's starting to occupy. Yes, in care, but in general as well in the workplaces. And so as clinicians, how can we leverage this tool to make care better? That is one question we need to ask ourselves. And that could look like clinical guiding principles or clinical support, for example, or a system that can flag when we may have missed something, a sign or a symptom for example, suicide or trauma. And so while we need to be careful of AI and not replace clinicians by robots and machines, we can still use it as a tool to be better clinicians and also share the knowledge with each other. And when we also look at the infrastructures of care, AI can be used to facilitate interprofessional collaboration. And we must not neglige how useful this can be if used properly. And I would say maybe you look like you have it. Okay. Now, just to conclude, demonizing AI will not bring us anywhere. And if we want to remain in front of the wave and keep thinking about innovative policies and ways to support our communities, we need to harness it the best we can.
Okay, and then quickly, how can the VAC minister work with the new AI minister to adopt trauma-informed supports to enhance mental health?
Well, I would say maybe two ideas here. Maybe first, like having conversations, like starting talking about it, and then also understanding what it means to be trauma-informed. It's easy to say, oh, this practice is trauma-informed, this other practice is trauma-informed, but is it really, or do you want it to be so you can check that box? And so I think being able to create this iterative process and ask ourselves the good questions about what is trauma-informed, what do we need to put in place, and how can this evolve with the situation in the world is how we'll be able to offer, quality services to our vets and work with the technologies that exist.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Veilleux.
Thank you very much, Madame Veilleux. And for 2.5 minutes, Madame Gaudreau. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have the impression, and thank you very much for having talked about this question of stigma. Let's talk about terms. You talk about the forces, the Canadian Armed Forces, and then afterwards, it seems like we're talking about a weakness or something that's different in a certain period of our life, an injury. And I have the impression that within this system, these words mean that we're not allowed to be weak or vulnerable. And that really strikes me in this whole awareness-raising process around this culture of silence, where we've got to be strong at all costs. And just to open a parenthesis for a moment, Madame Veilleux, have you seen the film Seul au front, Alone on the Front? I'd invite you all to watch this film and then read the report from Madame Veilleux, because I have the impression that through all of the different opening comments that have been made and the answers to questions given, that allows us to managed to penetrate slightly into this world. So I'd invite you to do that. Now, my question, what are we afraid of? What's stopping us from really taking action? We're afraid of failing. We're afraid of the political costs of an action that might not generate enough, bring enough results, or we're afraid of putting forward policies that might make it worse. We're afraid of not recognizing the problem. It seems to me that when we look at the mental health services that are offered to veterans, we think, have I ticked that box? Is there a program? Yes or no? Is it accessible? Yes or no? My work is done. Have a good day. Goodbye. And then we're afraid to actually look at the results. We're afraid of looking at how we can improve things and what's failing in the system, because sometimes it seems to be a real mountain to climb to do this. But instead of looking at the mountain and not having the courage to climb this mountain, perhaps we need to start just step by step, start somewhere. And then some years later, we can realize that each of these steps has led to a more equitable, a fair system that recognizes suffering, and that really would have made a difference. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madame Veilleux.
Including our round 4, yes.
No, we have a couple minutes. Could I get unanimous consent to have the witnesses answer the question about sanctuary trauma? We've got a couple minutes that would be left anyways.
Do we have unanimous consent? Yes. Excellent.
Thanks. So do you need me to re-put the question or? Okay. So you both had mentioned sanctuary trauma in your remarks. I guess I wanted to ask specifically in terms of Veterans Affairs, what could they do different in order to reduce sanctuary trauma that veterans and family members experience when dealing with them? And I'd like both of you, if you could, to give a response.
For myself, as a family member of someone receiving these services, a lot of it's the proof and having to retell their story time and time again. It's every year having to prove the disability or the sickness or the diagnosis. You know, even applying for things like such as we talk about stigma and mental health, you know, or resources to help us make us feel better, things being denied, like the request of a weighted blanket or the request of seeing a nutritionist to help with how the PTSD has affected nutrition. It's a lot of, you know, having to prove and prove again, like it's not taken as belief or word, or it's difficult to explain.
I think you've done a very good job of explaining it, you know, that we having to retell and reprove. That's something we hear all the time from veterans. So you've explained it well, thank you. Madame Veilleux?
Oui. Je voudrais que...
Madame Veilleux, briefly, please. Well, it's not my strength. So, actions have to follow through on their promises. When we join the Canadian Armed Forces, we're promised that we're going to have support for life, and then these promises are forgotten, and then we're completely neglected and we don't receive the services we need when we leave the forces. So we have to avoid that sanctuary trauma and make sure that the care is there and that it's well adapted. And Madame Ruth has referred to this pace of support. You have to fit it all into 3 meetings. Well, of course, this trauma is still going to be there and there's a risk of re-traumatization. How many times do we have to tell our story to be taken seriously, to move from one level of care to another, and then to always have to prove this? For example, with sexual violence, did this really happen? So if we could tackle these different points, then I think we'd already be able to prevent, to a great extent, sanctuary trauma. Thank you very much.
Ms. Root, our sincere condolence for your loss. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for coming here this morning. We appreciate it. And Madame Veilleux, un plaisir de vous rencontrer.
It was a real pleasure to meet you, Madame Veilleux.
Our next panel. Merci beaucoup.
We will be resuming the committee, so I will invite all members to come and sit down, please. I apologize, I'll need some quiet time. For those that are entertaining conversation, maybe step outside. I apologize. We just want to be very respectful for our next panel. So I would like to take a few moments for the benefits of our new witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And for those participating in video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. We are joined with three individuals this second hour of our motion and our study. As an individual, Mrs. Judith Hills, caporal et technicienne en aéronautique,
Corporal and aeronautic technician with the Canadian Armed Forces.
And from the Canadian Mental Health Organization, SM Sans Souci, National Government Relation Lead in Person, and Mr. Robert Olson, Research Librarian. I would like to invite Mrs. Hills to start for 5 minutes, and then we'll invite Mr. Olson and Madame Sans Souci for the reminder. Merci.
Good morning. Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Firstly, I would like to thank you for giving me a voice to this committee on behalf of my son, Sam. My name is Judy Hills. I'm a corporal serving in the Royal Canadian Air Force in Comox, but I'm being released medically in January. I'm also a mother of 4. My youngest son, Corporal Samuel James Hills, was serving in the Canadian Forces as a signaller at CFB Trenton when he died by suicide August 19th, 2021. Sam had gone to mental health in Petawawa for help with anger management. Immediately, he was prescribed Prozac. Within a few weeks, Wellbutrin was added to his prescription. He was posted from Petawawa to Trenton in 2020 while on both medications. While in Trenton, they kept adjusting the medications. I'm not sure if he was being treated for depression, anxiety, or anger, but he seemed fine to me. While he was adjusting to life as a single man after a marital breakdown, I'd have never suspected that he was experiencing suicidal thoughts at the time of his death. In late July, early August of 2021, he told me that he was afraid he was starting to have psychosis. He was having difficulty telling the difference between what was real and what wasn't. He didn't elaborate much at the time, but he spoke to the MIR the following morning and was prescribed an antipsychotic drug called Latuda, in addition to the Wellbutrin and the Prozac. These drugs should never be prescribed simultaneously, and I'll elaborate shortly on that. Within a few short weeks, he ended his life by hanging. An hour or so before he died, he called me. He told me about a reoccurring nightmare that he'd been having for weeks. In the dream, he was being chased by a hellhound. In the last dream, the hound was old and tired, and he tamed it by showing compassion and care. It curled up in his lap. He died shortly after our call. The coroner's report listed his death as August 19th, but I feel that he died the night of the 18th within the hour after our call. I knew he was having a difficult night, but I had no idea that he was contemplating suicide, or I would have called the MPs to do a wellness check. I live with so much guilt because of as his mother, I feel that I should have known. In his 2-page suicide note, he spoke in detail about this nightmare. I have nightmares now that I can't tell if they're real or not, so I think I understand what he meant. When Sam was posted to Trenton, he had a warrant officer who began very early on to harass him. The schedule that they worked was brutal and gave very little time to allow for any kind of social life or rest. So he and a co-worker came up with a few options, which he discussed with the warrant officer. He told me she got angry for suggesting a change and that she wasn't changing anything. The captain of the unit did, however, change the schedule on a trial basis. This upset her, and the working relationship went downhill from there. He would often call me frustrated and even in tears after having a difficult day while at work because of that relationship. I told him that he should talk with a harassment advisor, but he didn't want to stir the pot or be known as a complainer. Within a day of his death, my oldest son, who had also been a signaller, got a call from a mutual friend who was also a signaller, and he and Sam's, who told my son that the warrant officer needed to be looked at regarding harassment of Sam prior to his death. I was also told that apparently the warrant officer submitted her release that morning he died when the news hit his unit. She also hired a lawyer to represent her at the Board of Inquiry. During the Board of Inquiry, the allegations of harassment and bullying were brought up during her interview, which I was present at. She denied any harassment, saying that she and Sam had gotten along fine and denied any wrongdoing. At the completion of the BOI, once the findings were presented to Winnipeg, the president of the BOI was told to redact any piece regarding the alleged harassment based on her interview, but he refused because he felt that there was truth in the allegations. So instead, they wrote in their report that there was no evidence of harassment. My son, obviously, didn't have a chance to tell his side of events because he was dead. The medications that Sam had been prescribed were not even discussed in the BOI. Wellbutrin is long known as a drug that can cause both nightmares and hallucinations. Rather than weaning him off the drug, instead he was prescribed Latuda, the antipsychotic, as an addition to the 2 antidepressant drugs he was already taking. The psychiatrist who saw Sam just days before he died did not prescribe the drug, so somebody at the MIR did and did not consider the contradictions of mixing these 3 drugs together. After he died, I spoke with a pharmacist and asked if it was safe to prescribe all 3 at once, and he said no, not unless the patient is in hospital and is under observation. Sam was not even on sick leave, let alone under any kind of observation. Mixing Latuda and Wellbutrin is known to cause confusion. Combining antidepressants and antipsychotic medication also can increase the risk of suicidal ideation and behavior. This is a well-documented risk, a risk that was not calculated prior to my son's death. The Board of Inquiry found no fault of the military in Sam's death. They did not consider the harassment as problematic. They did not even investigate the medications that he had been prescribed. The president of the BOI flew to Comox from Trenton with the findings to deliver them in person to me. He said that he felt the findings were unfair. In the months after Sam died, I reached out to Winnipeg and requested that the BOI be reopened since they did not investigate the medications that he had been prescribed. I received a letter from a general from the Office of the Board of Inquiry offering condolences, but said they do not reopen findings of BOIs. Sam was a friend to everyone, especially to those who didn't have many friends. He was empathetic and compassionate. He taught me to be less judgmental, and he taught me patience. He was funny and he was charming. He was a self-taught, gifted guitarist. He was kind. He was a son, a brother, an uncle, a nephew, and a cousin. He loved his 2 dogs, Buddy and Theo. They were his boys. He was proud to serve his country, yet his service was not even recognized. My former husband and I did not even receive the Memorial Cross because the military said his death was not related to his service, and I beg to differ. Sam was and is not a statistic. He was so much more than that. In the 4 years since he died, I have also lost both of my parents, Sam's dog, Buddy, and I am now facing the end of my career in a few short months because my mental health no longer aligns with universality of service. I'm living in a never-ending maze of compounding grief. Between 2021 and 2023, there were over 40 deaths by suicide in the Canadian Forces. The statistics for 24-25 have not been officially released, but I know those numbers are not decreasing. I have lost several friends in the CAF to suicide. One of my secondary duties in the CAF is as a sentinel. One of my coworkers approached me because he had been to mental health as he was experiencing thoughts of suicide. When he had gone to mental health on the base, he was told that nobody could see him for at least 2 weeks. He had been living in the barracks when they were destroyed by a gas leak explosion in Comox, and he was struggling with his mental health as a result. I let him talk, and I gave him the number for the Canadian Forces Member Assistance Program, and I regularly followed up with him. I also discussed what had happened at mental health with our chain of command, and nothing was done until I spoke to someone higher up in the chain of command a few weeks later. I have another friend who was told to go to a civilian ER when he was suicidal. They wanted to dismiss him back to the MIR within hours because he was military. Luckily, his wife advocated for his well-being, and he was admitted to a psychiatric ward on a 72-hour hold. I don't know the answer. I don't know how to fix it, but I do know that something has to be done. I wouldn't wish what my family has gone through on my worst enemy. I wish that no parent, no mother or father should ever receive the call that I did on the morning of 19th of August, 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hills. For 5 minutes, Mr. Olson.
First off, thank you, Ms. Hills, for your testimony, and we give our profound condolences to your loss. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Robert Olson, Research Librarian at Canadian Mental Health Association, Alberta Division, and Centre for Suicide Prevention. We lead community mental health in Alberta and suicide prevention in Canada. We do this by convening, educating, incubating, funding, and driving systems change with myriad partners throughout our province and across Canada. I'm joined today by my colleague SM Sansusi from CMHA National. Thank you for inviting us to your committee to speak about veteran suicide. Suicide among veterans continues to be alarming and persistent. This is why comprehensive, targeted, and sustained mental health supports for veterans and their families are so crucial. The burden of suicide in this population is at crisis levels. As committee members learned from previous testimony, our organization collaboratively developed a suite of resources with the Atlas Institute to address veteran suicide. These resources are supported by evidence-based research, as well as informed by an advisory group of veterans with lived experience and their family members. And you also know of the efforts that have been made to prevent suicide among veterans and active Canadian Armed Forces members. The CAF-VAC Joint Suicide Prevention Strategy, with its 7 lines of effort, first published in 2017, demonstrates the commitment to suicide prevention the two bodies hold for their members. This is to be commended and amplified, as should the efforts around the federal framework and the National Suicide Prevention Action Plan, particularly the implementation of 988, the Suicide Crisis Helpline. Efficacious suicide prevention work, like bringing about any social change, relies on a balance of universal and targeted approaches. Anyone can have thoughts of suicide. However, some groups of people are disproportionately affected by it. We call these groups priority populations. Universal or whole population initiatives are needed to reduce stigma, raise awareness, and address broader social determinants of health. However, universal approaches alone insufficiently serve priority populations such as veterans. Priority populations benefit from targeted approaches designed around their unique precipitating factors, and these efforts are best implemented when underpinned by the work of a universal strategy. In short, we need a pan-Canadian suicide prevention strategy that considers all people in Canada and the populations most affected by suicide. Canada is one of few industrialized nations without a national strategy. Research shows multi-pronged national strategies that are appropriately resourced and implemented lower suicide rates and attempts. National strategies are comprehensive. They reduce stigma, drive awareness, and address issues such as the broader determinants of health contributing to suicide, such as housing and homelessness. These are exceedingly important for veterans, but they are currently not being considered in any coordinated way. A national strategy has clear deliverables and outcome targets that are regularly measured and evaluated. Because health is a provincial and territorial responsibility, cooperation and collaboration at the federal, provincial, territorial table is crucial. A strategy must be co-developed at this table if we want to see robust uptake and implementation by the provinces and territories. Ultimately, it would be coordinated at the federal level, but dedicated yet flexible funding would flow to the provinces and territories to ensure they are able to address their own related priorities based on readiness and local capacity. Comprehensive cross-ministerial efforts are also key. A wide range of ministries whose remits are relevant to suicide and its prevention must be included in development, implementation, and evaluation. This committee has heard testimony that despite the actions of the CAFVAC joint strategy, significant gaps and lack of resources for veterans remain. Initiatives that need to be shored up include peer support initiatives such as CMHA's OSI CAN program, which is a culturally relevant community-based support program for veterans. Other elements include the need to strengthen access to timely, coordinated care, and healthcare providers also need to be trained to be culturally competent. They need to understand the unique realities of the veteran community. And we need to enhance supports in the period of transition from military to civilian life. CMHA Alberta and Centre for Suicide Prevention commends this committee for its interest and focus on veteran suicide prevention. We urge you to augment the targeted efforts for this critical priority population and join our call for a national strategy that serves all the people in Canada. Universal approaches lift targeted approaches. Suicide prevention involves us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olson. This will conclude the portion of testimony. Mrs. Hills, on behalf of this committee, I want to say our profound condolences and thank you for your courage. If at any point you need some time, please let us know here. I don't mind suspending our committee, okay? I just want to make sure that you're okay.
Thank you.
Listen, as we go forward, there will be rounds of questions to our witnesses. I just want to let you know that sometimes I may have to interrupt. Members of Parliament knows their time, so we will start with 6 minutes. And again, if members exceed that time, I may have to interrupt, so I apologize sincerely on that. Starting Mrs. Wagenthal for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses today for being here. Can I call you Judith?
Judy or Judith is fine.
Judy or Judith. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine the grief that you have experienced or what your son went through and desperately tried to deal with. We serve veterans here. However, it's become clearer and clearer to me that veterans come with a great deal of injury, a lot of times from their service, that is very difficult to explain or to prove or to deal with. When I hear stories like yours, it is not, unfortunately, rare. You were told that his death was not related to his service. Can you share with us a little bit more of how that's beyond incredulous and where you think the true intent is behind making a statement like that in regard to a young man who was serving and took his own life?
I wish I had the answers. Anybody who knew Sam, anybody who had worked with him, could attest to the fact that he was very proud of his service. He was very proud to serve. What he went through once he got to Trenton with his warrant officer was it was hell for him. I mean, she just, I guess from the get-go, from the moment he tried to, discuss changing a schedule to make it better for everybody because they were working 12 on, 12 off. No time for a social life, especially for a young man who was just coming out of, a marriage. He had to isolate through COVID because of the way his unit was. It was people knew what he was going through, and for the Board of Inquiry, and I sat behind her, during her interview, and, she was incredibly nervous and wringing her hands under the table and everything. And, she just, you could tell, I mean, I could say you could tell she was lying. Obviously, I'm biased. I'm his mother. But from hearing what other people had said about what he had gone through work, and to have her say, no, Sam and I got along wonderfully. And, when he was having his medications all adjusted and they wanted him to just work days, she got angry at him, saying, how am I supposed to do this in my unit when everybody has to work 12 hours? How am I supposed to give you special treatment? Yet she denied that. Some people are going through harassment, and the military is saying, especially with Sam, no, this didn't happen. This didn't happen at all. So basically making it okay for it to continue happening.
Thank you. I know that's a difficult question to try and answer. What I'm sensing here is, yes, there was harassment from your perspective, and I would tend to, just honestly agree. But that chain of command seems to be an issue within our Canadian Armed Forces, and that harassment may very well be an issue from the top down through to those at your son's level of service. So this is something that is impacting our veterans extensively, and to be able to not have that confidence that you can say this is due to service, even in regard to your son's relationship with his wife, how much of that was in regard to the circumstances of his service. But in regard to the Memorial Cross, I've had others come to me who were just devastated because they were told that there was no qualification. The death was not related to service. I want you to know that that can be changed and it can be fought for on your behalf. So I don't know who your member of parliament is, but I would really encourage you, if you haven't gone that direction, or give me a call. This is inappropriate, and we need to make that change for sure on your behalf.
Thank you so much.
Yes, no problem, no problem. Those of you with the Canadian Mental Health Association, thank you so much for all that you do in your research and your efforts to prevent suicide. We heard from a witness previous here who lost her husband very recently in the RCMP, and one of the first things she talked about is he worked alone. I know this even in my riding. Our RCMP members work in rural and remote areas, and they're out where they are covering 200 kilometers, and if something was to happen, there's no way there's going to be help there in time. There's a lot of things like this that are so practical that how do we integrate them into the process of making sure that suicide is prevented? There was an assessment of him and
Mrs. Wagenthal, I'm sorry.
Out of time.
Yes, you are.
Okay.
I very much
No, that's
sorry
fine.
for this.
I appreciate what you do, Chair.
Thank you very much.
I apologize.
Madame Auguste,
Perhaps
6
we
minutes.
can answer later.
6 minutes, Madame Auguste. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would like to extend my sincere condolences to Madame Hills. I cannot start to imagine what you are going through. I'd like to put a question to Mr. Olson and concentrate on the Centre for Suicide Prevention, please, and the OSI. So I'd like to know which elements should this committee take into consideration when having discussions on the recommendations to be made to the government. How could you translate your experience and the experience of CMHO and turn it into advice for this committee?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, je peux répéter.
I can repeat. So, what would your recommendations be to make to the government? And could you draw on your experience and the experience of the CMHO, and how could that help us to meet the needs of veterans in this committee, based on your experience?
Okay. Well, from CMHE Alberta's perspective, we have the OSI CAN program, which is peer support. One of the gaps that we understand is peer supports for veterans. If those kinds of programs that we offer and others could offer and can offer were shored up, I think that would enhance veterans' dealings with mental health issues, because we hear often veterans prefer dealing with one another, those who have dealt with similar struggles. So peer supports are definitely an avenue to enhance and strengthen.
Cool. En ce qui concerne
on the Suicide Prevention Centre, have you looked at other innovative approaches for suicide prevention, and specifically the difficulties of veterans and first respondents? Have you looked at other innovative approaches?
I'm having difficulty hearing the question, sorry.
Yeah.
Répète-le, s'il vous plaît, puis après on va...
Please repeat. So I'll repeat more slowly. When it comes to the Suicide Prevention Centre, has the CMHO looked at new or innovative approaches in terms of suicide prevention, specifically to deal with the difficulties experienced by veterans and first interveners? Have you looked at innovative approaches?
Taking into account the experiences of those, the lived experience element has been drawn into a lot of our initiatives and resources that we created with and crafted with Atlas, as well as families. And I think those are two elements that have been not robustly investigated and added in the past, so that's an innovation I think that we have added to the mix with our work with Atlas, yes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And for 6 minutes, yes, Madame Gaudreau, do you want to give me any more?
Madame Gaudreau pour 6 minutes.
6 minutes, Madame Gaudreau. I will speak in French. Just a moment. We want to make sure that you can hear the earpiece.
Is high because sometimes I think the volume for interpretation is not getting through. So we'll let you just prepare. So Madame Gaudreau will ask questions in français.
Okay.
Is the sound good? Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Je vais parler en français.
I'll speak in French. And is the volume good now? Can you hear me, sir?
I think so. Yeah.
OK. Donc, Madame Gaudreau va vous...
So Madame Gaudreau will put some questions to you. Can you hear me now, sir? Perfect. And of course, take your time. So very simply, I'd like to offer you some time to explain, unless I've not understood, explain these 7 lines of effort since 2017. And you said they were insufficient, inadequate.
I did not. I said they were, those are the kind of 7 objectives that were in the original 2017 CAF-VAC strategy. We didn't say, and I didn't say they were inadequate. They've done some work. I believe 50% of those sub-actions in the 7 lines have been accomplished, so that's not nothing. What we are hearing, though, there are still gaps and deficits that need to be addressed in relation to veterans. And the CAFVAC strategy would benefit from a national strategy which would bolster this priority strategy, or else augment it with other actions for veterans within the strategy. So it's doing good work. It's just it needs some bolstering, we'll say.
OK. Avez-vous entendu le...
Have you heard the testimony of Madame Veilleux this morning, earlier? She was explaining in a systemic, global way about the different gaps and issues around the specific interventions when welcoming people, when a veteran has difficulties to actually carry out their duties, and looking into what happens afterwards.
Okay, did I hear it?
Mm-hmm.
When, like, this was in the last round? No, I didn't.
Okay.
Okay, but I can totally agree with that, yes. Yeah, we are waiting for...
Parfait.
Sorry.
Avez-vous vu...
So have you seen the film Alone on the Front Lines, Seul au front in French? It's a movie, Alone on the Front Lines.
Not yet. I have heard. Yes.
It's called Outstanding in English.
That.
Non, c'est correct.
No, that's fine. I have another question. Do you have data, evidence about the subject of what can happen with gendered intersectorial data? I want to know what's happening with suicide prevention amongst women, Indigenous women, LGBTQ plus folk. So is there public data on what's happening with these people?
Data in the sense
Mr. Holson, I apologize. Can you just come a little forward for the interpreter, for making sure that Mrs. Gaudreau can hear you also? I apologize.
Of course, yes. Are you asking if there are data on suicide deaths for these? Now, unfortunately, in Canada, we don't parse the details, and that's one of the suggestions that we've been pushing for is more granular data of death data, because it's not presently parsed in ethnicity or occupation. Sexual diversity might be a little more difficult to ascertain, at time of death, but any efforts to bring more clarity to an individual who dies by suicide and the specific circumstances and characteristics that one has is always welcome, and we're lagging in Canada on that.
Okay.
So yes,
Merci. J'aimerais vous entendre sur la culture du silence dans les forces.
I'd like to hear about the culture of silence in the Canadian Armed Forces, both in the RCMP, in fact, and in the CAF. So this culture of silence for our veterans, could you talk about that?
Thank you for the question. I'll take that one. I also want to, as a military spouse of a veteran and active forces member, thank this committee for this important study. The Canadian Mental Health Association and the Centre for Suicide Prevention is not directly linked to the Canadian Armed Forces or Veterans Affairs, so it would not be appropriate for us to speak to that culture that you mentioned.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Round, we'll start with 5 minutes, Mr. Viersen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted, Ms. Hills, could you just remind me, I tried to write them down as you said them, but you stated that your son was on 3 different types of medication. Could you just remind me of that?
Yeah, he was on Latuda, which is an antipsychotic, and he was on Wellbutrin, and he was on Prozac.
All right. My colleague, Ms. Wagenthal, has a couple more questions as well, so I'll just hand my time over to her. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Hills, you mentioned that you were aware that from 2021 to 2023, there were 40 suicides that took place within the Canadian Armed Forces. Within the veterans community and CAF, we find it hard to get these numbers. How are you aware of that? Can you explain that to me, please?
Well, it's readily available online. I was also led a wreath-laying service yesterday for Canadians who died on Canadian soil, including those who died of PTSD or suicide. And the numbers are there. I believe they got, and those are the numbers of people who are coming forward, of families who feel comfortable to disclose that their loved one died by suicide. I took a picture of it. I wish I could show it to you, but just the numbers are staggering. 21, 22, 23. There's a lot of, in this picture that I have, a lot of black ribbons, which indicate people who have died, but the family doesn't want the name released.
Okay.
But I believe they got their statistics through Veterans Affairs.
Would you be able to send that document to the committee?
Yeah, I can go online and send that. Yeah.
I would appreciate that. Thank you very much.
How do I send that?
To the clerk? You have it here?
Well, l'analyst can pull it up.
Oh,
for
I
you.
see. Okay.
Just
Our
out of
amazing
respect.
analyst can get that for me.
Okay, thank you.
I'm missing my executive assistant at the moment, and it's awful. It's awful. Okay. With that, you're giving us numbers that are past what we've heard here at the committee. There's a new report supposedly coming out shortly that we were told would probably look significantly concerning. And you also mentioned that that's to 2023 and that you expect that those numbers would be going up further. Do you have a sense, as someone who's been through this horrific scenario, as to why those numbers are so high?
I wish I knew. I don't know why the numbers are increasing. I know that, as I mentioned about my coworker going to mental health and being told, even though you're suicidal, sorry, come back in 2 weeks and we'll help you. Another friend being told when he was, at a risk of taking his life that morning, being told to go to a civilian emergency room, and they're telling him, oh no, go back to the MIR, you're not one of our patients. There's so much. Somebody just wants help at that point. Someone's just asking for help, and they're being kind of bashed around like a badminton birdie. The frustration when somebody is in crisis of not knowing who to go to, or just being thrown around like they don't really matter.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I mean, there is an awareness now, I think, that has not been there, or perhaps because of the public being more aware as well, that we have not done a good job of this within Canada, of caring for the mental health, wellness of our serving members. And of course, that has implicated the conditions that we're facing with our veterans as well. So I just want to, again, thank you so much for being willing to share what you personally have been going through now, and then also the loss of your son. And we really do appreciate your testimony today. And there's nothing more important, I think, than anecdotal evidence that comes to this committee to also be significantly weighted in how we come up with recommendations. Is there anything specifically, am I past? Oh. All right. Is there anything specifically you would say to us that we should be doing immediately to make a difference for others like your son who are struggling so much?
It's a difficult one. I wish I knew. Maybe making it so that people are less afraid to approach mental health. I know myself, I'm being released from the military. I don't want to be released, but because I require the services of mental health, and even when I stopped going to mental health, they told me I had to keep going. And then they turn around and they, are releasing me for medical reasons for PTSD or mental health. And I know that, at least 5 people that I am working with this year who are some of the best soldiers I've ever served with are being released. And guess what? They all use the services of mental health. I don't know. I wish I knew the answers.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hills. For 5 minutes, Mr. Casey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Corporal Hills, first of all, thank you for your testimony and thank you for your service. Before putting my name on the ballot, I was a litigator with a specialty in medical malpractice. You can imagine the testimony that we heard today, what's going on in my head in terms of going back to what I did before I came to Parliament. Your testimony raised numerous questions that I have a professional interest in as a result of my background. We don't have the time, nor would it be appropriate in this venue to delve into those questions in the level of detail that I would like to. So I'm going to start with an invitation. If you think it would be helpful to you to talk to a retired litigator with some experience in medical malpractice, I am available to you after this meeting. And I'd get my contact information to you. There's a bunch of things that you said where there may be other avenues. Should you wish to go there, I don't think a public forum is a place for that discussion, and I fear the risk of re-traumatization. But that offer is open to you.
Yeah.
To our friends from CMHA, first of all, thank you for your testimony. You talked about a pan-Canadian strategy and indicated that Canada is one of the few countries that doesn't have one. My question is this: what's the gold standard, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel? What are the best practices globally?
Well, the gold standard is to the normal trajectory is to have a framework, which we have, and then have a strategy that has a binding kind of agreement and resource commitments and timelines and deliverables that are mapped out, and then the action plan is the implementation part of the strategy. So we went from a framework to an action plan. So we believe that despite some good work that has been done, we should take the time and energy to start again with the strategy, not throw out everything that's going on, but incorporate it into a renewed action plan based on our comprehensive strategy that we craft. So we've been calling for one since 2004, so the call continues. And the International Association for Suicide Prevention has a call in 2021 for all, and it's called Partnerships for Life, that all countries should have a national strategy, and that call continues today, and I believe at this point in 2025 there are 40 plus countries with one.
Okay. We heard actually earlier today that one example of a peer support network that is top shelf internationally is in the UK. We heard that from Madame Villieu. Are you familiar? I know you referenced peer support programs in your testimony as well. Are you familiar with what's available in the UK? And are there lessons to be learned from that, specifically on the peer support side?
We're always analyzing and familiarizing ourselves with peer support programs that are done internationally, and there are always lessons to be learned. Do you have anything to say on that? To answer that more thoughtfully, I think I would have to examine this particular program in depth, and I can get back to you, though, if you would like.
That would be appreciated. Last question, very quickly. We heard earlier today that when someone reaches out to Veterans Affairs, they will not necessarily get a list of available programs. You started your testimony by saying that you have a suite of resources at the CMHA in conjunction with Atlas.
Yes.
Is that a list that would be of use to case managers in Veterans Affairs when dealing with veterans?
Yes, there are resources listed in the three guides, or in the two of the three guides that have other avenues someone at risk or a family of someone at risk could pursue. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olson. Pour 2 minutes et demie, Madame Gaudreau.
Madame Gaudreau, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Corporal Hills. First of all, I want to make sure interpretation is working for you into English on Zoom. Perfect. So, first of all, I'd like to extend my sincerest condolences. It seems to be far more than a double trauma that you're going through, and that really merits being mentioned. So I would like to speak to your resilience and your courage to come before us. So in the 2 minutes that are left, I'd like to offer them to you, because the minister is looking to us, and also the deputy ministers have come to meet with us this week. They're all looking to us. So if they were in front of you, the ministers, what would you mention to them? What would be the most fundamental points that you would raise with them?
I don't know. Maybe bringing about a change in the military, that people aren't afraid to go to mental health. People aren't afraid of their careers being affected if they go to mental health. Obviously, somehow we need to end the stigma of mental health. I mean, I know we're all meant to be strong, and, being sent off into war is what we train for. But at the end of the day, we're all human beings. And we all do still have emotions. And, when our lives are difficult, we're sent away from family often. We know that we can be sent away at any given time. But to be given the respect of when we do need the help, that we don't have to fear for our careers. And this is something that, we've had videos about. It's been brought up that, if you need the help, you get it. We're there. We support you. But when you turn around and you use the resources, it's held against you. It feels like it's held against you. And, as I mentioned earlier, the number of people I know being released just in the past year, and all of us have needed the help of mental health, and something's not working. Something's just fundamentally wrong.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Hills. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Hills and Madam Chair.
I have about 2 minutes that, as we are concluding this, maybe allowing Mr. Olson or Mrs. Hills to just tell us maybe a recommendation, something very concrete that we could take back at this time.
I guess just to reiterate what we said at the outset, and that is continue and strengthen the efforts we're making to help veterans, and don't discount convening those interested groups to develop a strategy, a national strategy. It may seem it's worth the effort, I think, to get this done right. So, yeah, just re-emphasizing that.
Thank you. Corporate Hills?
Well, first I'd like to say, in my career, I fix airplanes. I don't know how to fix mental health, but I do know that I'm not sure what needs to be done. As I say, my expertise is in aircraft, not in mines, but those who do understand, I just want to see changes. It's too late for my son. It's too late for the many friends that I have lost. But I do want to see changes somehow made. When I see the news come across and I've learned the language, you can always tell that, somebody has passed by suicide, even if the word's not used. And it's happening far too often. And every time it happens, another piece of my heart goes with it. I just want to see something fixed.
Thank you very much, Corporate Hills. And again, thank you for your service. Thank you for your courage today. Mr. Olson, thank you. And Madame Sanssouci, Mrs. Sanssouci, thank you very much. This is almost concluding our committee. I just have one housekeeping note to mention. So I just want to make sure that we're all... Pour l'étude sur la prévention.
So for the study on suicide prevention amongst veterans.
This for next time. I really want to actually convey this to all of you. There was a share of emotion that you all have, so we'll talk maybe outside of this committee to know if there's any notes that you would like to bring forward. So I will hold back on that, Mr. Clerk. Notre prochaine réunion aura lieu le...
Our next meeting will be on Tuesday, the 28th of October, 2025. And we'll be taking once again the study on the prevention of suicide. And before we finish, I'd like to recall you that the deadline for submitting a list of witnesses for the study on obstacles to entrepreneurship amongst veterans is next Friday, the 31st of October, 2025 at 4 p.m. And as you all know, dear colleagues, send in your lists to our clerk, please. So having said that, the committee is now, is it the will of the committee to adjourn?